Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to people around the world. This is Martin Hubel, your host of the DB2Night Show, and today is a really great show with social distancing or physical distancing, depending on who you talk to. We have some absolutely stellar guests the next couple of months coming on. Distinguished engineers, lab directors, chief architects. We're lucky, and you guys are lucky to be here too, because it's going to be a great show. Today we have Kerri Romanoff and Adam Storm with us. How are you guys doing today?
I'm doing well.
Oh,
yep,
good.
Doing
You
well.
sound great. That's great. So let me get the housekeeping out of the way, and then we'll turn it over to you fine folks. So as always, here's our social media stuff. We've got a Twitter handle, hashtag DB2Night, our LinkedIn group, and replays are now on YouTube. So if you don't want to download anything, you can watch us over the internet on our YouTube channel. The links are available on the replay blog. Here's our disclaimer. People own their copyrights. We are recording the show, and we'll be making replays available. And if you guys could be so kind as to send me a PDF of your slide decks, we'll put those on the replay blog as well, if you're allowed to share them. And as always, our quick announcements, studio audience polls, and then we'll have your presentation. And our upcoming shows. Next month, we have Peter from the IBM Canada Lab. And I'm not going to try to say that last name. I probably could. Mirsajewski, I think it's probably about as close as anyone will get. And he'll be with us next month as the lab director. That is another must-see show for the DB2 LUW audience. We're tickled pink to be able to fill in for face-to-face meetings here on the DB2Night Show. We've been doing the show now. This is show number 224 for DB2 LUW, and we're past the century mark on the ZOS side. So we have really been doing this for quite some time. I believe I've been involved now for about 8 years. On the ZOS side, we have an announcing type show from the IDUG folks. We love to help IDUG. They're part of the DB2 community. They lead the DB2 community. And initially that was to be a show about the conference in Dallas, but the Dallas conference has been postponed with all of the other situations going on in the world. It was not going to be practical to be able to run a conference that might be put on in the fall. They're still trying to make a decision on how they can handle a North American conference at this time. So please stay tuned. Please come and listen to what IDUG has to say. That'll be the North American Conference Chair. I believe the IDUG president and other leaders within the IDUG community will be on there. I've been a supporter now of IDUG for just 31 years. So I'm anxious to, and I also still serve on committees, and I'll be interested to hear what they have to say. Then we have Mariella Wyrock, another IBM DE, and she's been a regular contributor to the show, and we're always tickled to have her on. And Dave Belkey to finish off the year on topic on DB2 security. I don't have his exact title, but I'll have that up on the website for registration. Those shows, except for the June shows, are available for you to register now on our website. As always, if you'd like to listen to a presentation on DBI's tools, they have a demo link there. You can watch that. If you do, they give you a gift card for doing so. Also, we do give out a gift certificate to people that watch the show and pay attention. And our last show's winner is Cynthia, and Bank of New York Mellon. Congratulations to her. As always, our sponsors are DBI and yours truly, Martin Hubel Consulting, Inc. We're grateful to the support of DBI. They are very generous with the use of the GoToWebinar software that we use and the other support needed to make this show happen. As always, at this point, we don't have a commercial anymore. Scott Hayes, when he worked for DBI, Used to do about a 3-minute demo as part of the in the middle of the content. These days, I just put up a slide and let people know that a new version of the DBI Performance Suite is coming out. Here's one showing a very valuable chart I've used, showing performance trends. And when you see the spikes, you can click on those and get information. You can also look at anything that might have changed that would cause such a spike to happen. That's a good thing to have. But I'll leave that with you. All right, now we're into the polls. And let me launch a poll here. It's standard questions to start. We've got a lot of questions today because Kerri wanted to learn a little bit about how people are doing things. So, but we have our first questions here. What DB2 versions are you currently running? The latest version you have. And you can choose all that apply, and we like to see what people are doing there. As always, there are people that are up to date. Everybody seems to be on DB2.11 so far, at least. I need to update this, Kerri, because I only have 11.1, and of course I should have 11.5 on there. I'm going to get my top people to work on that. So let me close that off. I'll share the result. Everybody's on at least 11.1 in some way or shape or form. Some people are hanging on to the older, better, newer, tried and true software all the way back to 9.7. And there must be one person running version 9.5 or earlier. That stuff happens. I've been there. Used to be my one of my longest customers finally got rid of 8.2.2. And just a quick question on other commercial software that people have. I'm assuming anybody on the call is interested in DB2LUW. Just getting a list of what people have in other areas. People are clicking and filling in things there. It's getting to that critical threshold where everybody's had a chance to have their say. And we will close that off. Share the results there. It's often, as is often the case, our audience is also big users of DB2 for Z. And I had a bit of fun a couple of weeks ago, Kerri. I actually taught a class for DB2 on the AS400 or I series, depending on who you talk to. And that's a good little product. Very interesting how they've chosen features, and there's an awful lot of family compatibility in it. All right. Next, open source stuff. Anybody? Oops, darn, I forgot to change this to multiple. So pick the one you like best. I guess you only get to choose one. That's my mistake again. I'm going to fix that one of these years, months, days. Just because we have an outbreak going on doesn't mean I'm not going to make mistakes. I'm still capable of making mistakes during this time. There's the results: Mongo, MySQL, PostgreSQL, and everybody got represented today. That's nice to see. And now we'll move on to the specific questions for this show. These I believe I did correctly. Which of the following deployment methods do you use for development and test? And getting some interesting results in there. You can choose all that apply. We're getting that filled in. A lot of people, enough people have voted. We'll share that. Still doing an awful lot of things locally. We have container installs, cloud hosted, cloud managed. There. So let's move along and look at production. This is rather interesting, this one. Just about to go up to about the 30-second mark. That seems that people are voting quickly, so I'll close that off and share the results. this is rather interesting. It seems that for development test, people are doing a little more cloud management, container installs, but for production, people are still doing local with some of the other things. Interesting. Just a couple more here. DB2 end of service 10.5, the end of the month. What are you going to do? This is a bit of fun. People come through, and we're up to about 72% voted. I think I'm going to give people just a little more time on that. There's a bit of reading to do there. We're up to about 80% of our audience has voted, so we'll close and share that to be able to move on. Here we have it. There are some really old people at the beginning there. 13% are still on 10.1 or earlier. 65% of the audience is already upgraded to 11.1. And we have other people looking to do it soon, and some people looking to do it later. And the last question before we get into this is, when do you plan to move to 11.5? This also looks like an interesting response here. Got some people already on it. That's great to see. We've got some other people in testing and going soon, and other people unfortunately don't have an answer yet. I'll show you that now. And there we have it. 40% of the audience in production, 40% already testing. That's great news. And we've got other people waiting for more mod fix packs to come out, and about a quarter of the audience with no ETA. So there you go. Okay, let me close that off. Thanks for participating. It's always good to see what the crowd is doing. And with that, I'll move along. Hopefully you're seeing my screen again. At which point I'm going to make Kerri, would you like to be first, or would Adam like to go first?
So I think Adam, you don't have any slides, do you?
I do not.
Okay.
So I'll just make you, I'm going to make you the presenter then. And when you click the button and share your screen, we'll see, yep, I see it there. Latest from the lab. What's next for DB2 11.5? Great.
Sorry, I'm trying to figure out how to minimize all the windows that have come up.
Actually, the windows.
So today, this was planned probably back in January, and I'm going to talk about what's latest from the lab and what's next for DB2 version 11.5. I'm Kerri Romanoff. I'm the STSM and the chief architect for DB2. Normally, I would, not have special guests, but as everybody knows, it's a, unusual time in the world. So I actually invited Adam to kick this off with, a quick discussion on what's going on in a few words. So Adam, if you want to start.
Yeah, sure. Thank you very much, Kerri, and thanks, Martin, for having me on the show as well. Let me first give you a little bit of my background for those of you who don't know me. I've worked in DB2 development for the last 20 years. I've had my hands in a bunch of features that I'm sure folks on the call know. I was the architect for our self-tuning memory manager. I worked on PureScale. I worked in DB2 Glue, and then for the last 4 or 5 years, I've worked on DB2 Event Store and some of our capabilities on Cloud Pak for Data. I've also been on the DB2Night Show at least a couple of times. I think I remember a few times being on the show presenting, and you can find those episodes in the archives. The reason Kerri asked me to be on the show today is because, it really goes without saying that we're in unprecedented times. We're all being impacted by this, and I'm sorry, I'm sure you can hear my kids screaming in the background. That's the way I'm being impacted by this. A lot of us are in lockdown situations. We are being forced to work from home. Hold on just 1 second while I yell at my kids.
Does that ever really help? Yelling at them?
We'll see. We'll see. It took a few seconds. Sorry for that interruption, but
No
that
worries.
will. So, you know, it is unprecedented times. We're all being forced to do things we haven't been asked to do in the past. We're being challenged to work from home. But I think what's fortunate for us in our industry is that we're pretty lucky that the vast majority of us can work from home with some impact to our efficiency, but we can get almost everything that we want to get done if we're willing to put in the time and energy. And I know that that can be difficult in these times, but we've been very successful in doing that. And to that point, I want to ensure everyone on this call that, first of all, IBM is fully open for business. Our operations are being interrupted in some cases, but we're achieving all of the milestones we've been asked for by our customers. And to that point, the DB2 team is fully supported, it is fully up and running from a support perspective and also from a development perspective. We're fully staffed, we're working at full capacity. In some cases, I think we're probably working above our usual capacity because people aren't commuting into work anymore, people aren't taking vacations because there's nowhere to go. So we're getting a lot done. And the reason that I wanted to speak to you directly today is because I want to assure each and every one of you that we're going the extra mile in this crisis to ensure that our customers who are under unprecedented demands as well are able to meet the requirements that they have put upon them. So to that point, I want to say that if you're not seeing the responsiveness on support that you're accustomed to seeing, or if you have any concerns in general about DB2 in this climate, I'd like you to reach out to myself or Kerri directly. And Martin, you can share the ways to get in touch with us via the contact note or the notes for this episode, because I want to ensure that everyone knows that we're here for you in this time of crisis. So with that, let me turn it over to Kerri. Before I hand off though, please everyone stay safe and practice all of the measures that you're being encouraged to by your government at this time. It's really the only way that we can prevent this crisis from getting worse. So please, please act responsibly in this. And with that, let me turn it over to Kerri.
Thank you, Adam. That was very well said, and I appreciate you coming on to join me.
Pleasure.
So with that, we'll actually get into sort of the main, originally planned content. We'll start with the agenda. So we already had Adam as the special guest. Been a while since I had done a DB2Night Show, so I Googled, what are the key parts of a night show? I was told to start with a monologue, so I will initially have a monologue on the new version 11.5 numbering scheme. It then talked about having interviews, so I'm going to interview DB2 version 11.5. Strongly suggested a top 10 list, so there'll be a deep dive into some of the top 10 up-and-coming items, followed by a musical performance. And I was actually thinking the commercial breaks and polls were going to be interspersed throughout, but apparently we got them all done with the start. So I thank everybody for the feedback. There was definitely some interesting information in there. Martin, is the audio on for people to ask questions, or do you want me to leave all the questions to the end?
Actually, what we use is a question and answer tool, and people can actually put their questions in there, and I'm monitoring the queue. And
okay, perfect.
And so you'll just hear me break in. I've got myself muted though, in case there's any noise at this end, but I'll break in as needed.
Yeah, no worries then. So if you have questions as I'm going, feel free to type them out, and Martin will ask them as we're going. So the first thing are the usual disclaimer slides. I won't go in these in detail, but they're the usual trademark references, The second slide, also notes and disclaimers, is, you know, performance numbers are generally done inside the lab, you know, not necessarily 100% repeatable in your environments. And a key one of this, and here's my summary of them, is most of this deck is talking about the future roadmap for the first half of 2020. Things can and will change, and there's nothing in my deck that implies or guarantees that anything I talk about will be available at any specific point in time or even potentially ever. Again, things can and will change. So the monologue. So what's up with the DB2 11.5 numbering? So some of you may have seen that there are already what are known as container-only drops out there in addition to GA. So my goal is to explain what those are and also how the numbering will be going forward. So 11.5 is going to follow a continuous delivery model as we did with 11.1. So in the 11.5 stream, there will be both new function and fixes. If what we're shipping has new function, we will increment the mod level. And that's very similar to how we did 11.1. But if we increment the mod level, we are also going to reset the fixed pack level to 0. And this is new behavior compared to 11.1. Before, we would up the two of them in parallel. If something is shipped and it is fixes only, then in that case, it will increment the fixed pack level. And that is also true for how it worked in 11.1. The reason why we're doing this is one of the key complaints we got in how we did 11.1 is when we shipped those iFixes, which were really the fixes only that were dropped in between the larger mod packs, there was really no way to distinguish them from the base. So, you know, we had 11.1.1.1, and then we had an iFix, then it was 11.1.1.1 still, but then it was like either A or B. And it was hard for people to see that, and it also confused people. So the next thing I'm going to mention is that the DB2 family and, you know, DB2 11.5 really has two install options. The first being containerized, and the second being, you know, multi-platform install, or what, you know, is the traditional install that I think 96% of the people said that they used on the very first slides when I was asking how people did installs. So let's first talk about containerized installs. So the new containerized installs, and you'll hear people talk about it as DB2U, are Red Hat OpenShift based containers. They support single node and DPF or MPP setups. They currently do not support PureScale. They ship approximately every 2 months. Currently, these always have new function, and so they will currently are always mod packs. And this may change when 11.5 becomes a fixes only stream, but you know, there's no ETA for that. It, you know, there will be at least a while that it continues to be the continuous delivery stream. If you go and look, you can see that 11.5.1.0 and 11.5.2.0 are already available, and I believe 3.0, if not available, will be available shortly. These can be used for both DB2 installs, but they're also what is used across the DB2 family to ensure that things are aligned and synced. And if you were to move from, you know, Cloud Pak for data to DB2 on-prem, you can know that you're running the exact same level because of the way we're dropping these bi-monthly containers. So then there's also the multi-platform install, and this is what, you know, people see as their traditional, you know, DB2 install. These are the one that support all DB2 platforms. So Linux, Intel, Power, Z, AIX, and also Windows. It supports all DB2 configurations, single node, DPF/MPP, and PureScale. The mod packs are not shipped at a fixed interval. They're generally 6 to 12 months apart. That's historically what we've been doing. Between these mod packs, there may be fixed packs, and these are similar to the concept of the 11.1 iFixes, but there's two differences. The first is it will contain all the APARs, not just a subset. So with the iFixes, we picked, you know, a handful or a couple handfuls of, you know, the most important APARs. whereas now these will be all of the APARs that are done. And the other thing is, as I mentioned earlier, this will bump up the fixed pack field of the version number, making them easier to recognize and differentiate, especially when there's multiple of them between a mod pack. And going for the picture view of that, here's the life cycle of the 11.5. So we had GA, which is 11.5.0. What you have seen is there's an 11.5.1.0, 2.0, and I believe the 3.0 is actually already out there, but if it isn't, it will be out there soon. And those have had fixes in function, and those are the container install path. We have yet to have the fix packs on the 11.5 install path stream, but there have been the EAP going out. So there's been ways if you wanted to see what was coming in non-production level builds. At the end of first half of this year, we will be shipping the 11.5.n release, and it is going to have both fixes and functions. It is going to be supported in both a container install path and as the multi-platform install path. So it will really be the first, it's a mod pack, or what people will consider to be the first, fix pack of the 11.5 stream. Once that ships, there's going to be two things that are branching off, one of which is the fixes only, and those will be in the multi-platform install path. So you'll see 11.5. And I called it N, so a .1 and then a .2. And at the same time, the containerized install path will continue to have both fixes and function, and it'll be like 11.5.5.0 or .6.0 going forward, however those numbers work out.
Kerri?
And then at some point, they will join back up again.
Kerri?
Go ahead.
I've got a question here from Jackie. How do
Yep.
we know which incremental mod level we are at?
DB2 level, right? So if you type DB2 level, it will tell you what you're on.
Thanks.
And it gives you all 4 parts.
Great.
Right. Some of the connections, and to be honest, I don't remember exactly which one, but some connections and things like that show all 4 parts. Some of them only show 3, but DB2 level will always show all 4. So after some period of time, they will join back up again, and once again there will be a common fix packs off the install stream or mod pack, and mod pack off the container stream, and that will repeat for however long this is the current development stream. And then similar to 11.1, there will be a point where there is something new that becomes the current development stream, and then 11.5 would go fixes only. I'm going to pause for half a second just to make sure no one's typing questions before I switch topics.
That was the only question I had so far.
Okay, perfect.
Thanks.
So I'll go on to the next section. So the interview with DB2 11.5. Google's great because the other advice I got about running a night show was that when you're interviewing your guests, you should say as little as possible and let your charismatic guests speak as much as they can. So, I had a few open-ended questions where I basically said, DB2, tell me a bit about yourself. What did you do last summer, and what's your plans for the year? So the first thing that happened is DB2 went off on a tangent, and much like many people do when they're on a show, is they start talking about what's important to them, which is often their family. So the first thing is, here's a picture of the DB2 HDM, or the hybrid data management solutions, all of which are built on top of the common SQL engine. The key here is you write your SQL once, and you can deploy it on any form factor and run it in any of these. And as I talked about with the containerization and being able to cross-reference the build levels, you can know that you're running, the equivalent levels across them if you want to ensure you're at the same levels to start using new function. So across the common SQL engine, you've got DB2 Warehouse on cloud, you've got DB2 on cloud, you've got DB2 hosted, you got hosted analytics, which is the big SQL based. You can sort of see that as the chief architect for DB2, the core engine kind of gets bigger, bolder lettering. So on the non-cloud side, you have both DB2 and DB2 Warehouse. For the Cloud Pack for data, you've got the DB2 cartridge and DB2 Warehouse. And in addition to that, you have the IIS appliance, which is essentially DB2 Warehouse in an appliance form factor. And then you have DB2 Event Store. And I believe in the corner of my screen, I can't see, there's also Big SQL. So this is a view across the DB2 family and how there's a common engine. So like I said, the focus is being able to run your SQL in the exact same way across all of them and common applications.
Kerri?
Yep.
A couple of questions in as soon as we start asking for questions. It takes a little time for people to type them. On the mod level questions, Andre asked if what about special security fixes? Do they show up as well in DB2 level?
If it's packaged as a special build, then I think it shows, I don't think it shows up in the numbering. I believe it will show up in, like there's a path name or something that kind of more of a description. It does not have new numbering if it's a special build explicitly for security or a special build that, you know, a customer had to get a patch for a problem.
Okay, and when is Linux Red Hat 8 going to be supported?
So the target for Red Hat Linux 8 on 11.5 is the first half of this year.
Okay, that's what I got. Thank you.
Okay. So the next thing is basically a quick sort of review of what was some of the highlights in 11.5 GA. I'm going to go through these a little bit quickly, so they're a little bit more reference just for people who haven't seen the 11.5 presentations over the last year. But we had about 7 focus areas or hills that we were focusing on. One was cognitive and emerging technologies, and in this area, you know, things like the ML Optimizer technology preview were done. With Federation, we had tech preview support for blockchain, where you could go after the hyperledger and also and look at blockchain data. Under hybrid and multi-cloud, there was the Docker container. Application development, you know, there were new levels of support for .NET. We added Go language driver support. I think that was actually almost a year ago now, if not a little over a year ago. We added into Visual Studio Code a DB2 extension. So if you're working with DB2, it can now be automated and easier to see what you're doing on the DB2 side. And we also shipped the Augmented Data Explorer beta, and I believe it's GA now, which allows you to do some visualization on your data and run natural language query against your data. And it can connect to actually multiple levels of DB2. It's not limited to 11.5. There was also a very large number of Blue and MPP enhancements, because one of the things we were doing was reconverging DB2 warehouse code levels with the 11.1 code levels to create 11.5. And in this came a lot of enhancements, one of which was our next generation for bulk insert for columnar tables. You know, orders of magnitude faster. It does a lot of vectorization for both insert and update. It's got reduced undo logging. It had already built in parallel inserts, so you can actually get multiple insert points and also get multiple threads inserting at the same time based on a single SQL insert being run. Update and delete performance enhancements. Automatic dictionary creation was improved, and it was also became vectorized. And on top of that, one of the big key differences is in 11.5, we look at a lot more data to create the dictionary, so you get better dictionaries. As part of that, the data that you're looking at to create the dictionary initially goes in uncompressed. So one of the other enhancements was something called reorg recompress, which will take that uncompressed data that was used to build the dictionary, and then once the dictionary is built, it will actually, you know, essentially compress and repack that data to a smaller number of extents, and then allow you to free up the space that frees up from that. So we can have more data to create the dictionary, but still in the end getting it ultimately compressed into the active compression format that's used for Blue. I already mentioned vectorized ADC. We added lob support. Prior to 11.5, you could not create lobs in columnar tables, and there's a huge number of performance improvements in relation to being able to run your queries and having them stay within Blue and run much faster. Other highlights in GA availability, there was a advanced log space management tech preview. I'll talk about it briefly later on, but it's also one that I know that there was a full DB2Night Show that I think Michael Roken talked about it. So if you want a lot more detail, you can listen to that. And we also use parallelism in our logging when you're using mirrored logs. So the impact of running mirrored logs has been lowered. And it's something that a lot more customers are using, especially if they're starting to run on less stable hardware and less stable disks, which sometimes happens when there's pushes to go to commodity. There was a lot of 11.5 GA improvements for PureScale. We improved the cluster-wide free space management. We improved the ability to run within a host-based firewall. Automation for things like public Ethernet monitoring, increases in the number of ports and reducing limits. We also turned some things that had appeared in 11.1 in fixed packs, and in mod packs. And in mod packs, we tend to be conservative by what we turn on by default. And in 11.5 GA, we took the parallel online index create and the extent reclaims, which were both in, I think, 11.1.3 and 11.2 or .4. I can't remember the other one. And now they're on by default in 11.5. Support for currently committed across members. So even if the data is locked on a different member, we will go across the cluster to get that data for currently committed. And huge performance increases for load and partition tables. Under the core engine, external table support. So this is something that was related to a lot of DB2 Warehouse and Blue, but it is supported on both row and columnar tables. 4K sector size support. So this allows you to, if you have new disks, to run with 4K sector versus running in a 512 emulation. So this can inherently help performance under the covers. And if you had disks that only supported 4K, you can now run on those. Auto column group stats. So this is us automatically doing column group stats so to understand relationships and to get better estimates on cardinality. Very large number of additional monitoring elements were added. So, they monitor both new function and also, some RFEs of requests for additional monitoring elements. The ability to have a if exists clause on create and drop. That's a compatibility, I believe, with Postgres and Netezza. Same with create table as enhancements. Again, a lot of enhancements for Postgres compatibility. That's also where the SQL PL SQL enhancements are. And then we also added DBMS application info and util raw package support for Oracle compatibility. And also in WLM, we add some simplified thresholds, and if you do drop a service class, we can actually have them cascaded to make cleaning up and adjusting them easier. Any questions on what was in 11.5 GA? Knowing that I'll probably be a slide or two ahead by the time you get them typed, but that's it in a nutshell. Broad set of enhancements, lots in Blue, and we have large number of customers on 11.5, especially on DB2 warehouse code bases. And I think I can't totally remember, but I think almost 40% of the people said they were running 11.5 in production already. So that's great to hear. So now let's talk about the first half roadmap highlights. One of the key things that will be coming out in the first half is the graph database. So what this one is, and on the next two slides, I'll go into different levels of details on things, because some of them I have following slides for, and about 10 of them, and then for a number of them I don't. So the graph database, what this allows you to do is on existing relational data to essentially overlay a graph on top of it, you know, where you define your edges and your vertices, and then run queries via the DB2 Gremlin language. You basically start up a Gremlin and Tinkerpop server. You run your Gremlin queries. The graph database, based on, you know, what it has been told about the data layout and, you know, its knowledge of how graph queries work, it essentially translates those into SQL queries and runs them against the DB2 database. Sorry, apparently I should have been touching my laptop keys more often. Okay, if somebody doesn't see my screen, let me know. And so with this, there's a few other things that come. So first of all, there's tooling to help you define. No, I do not want to upgrade in the middle of a presentation. There's tooling to help you define what the graph should look like. And it does that by understanding and looking at your primary and foreign keys, because those in themselves tend to define relationships in relational databases. And just some quick comments on performance is, you know, with very small pieces of data, you know, we're, you know, I'd say close to on par with most of the graph databases out there. Once you have, you know, hundreds of thousands or even, you know, millions of rows, this actually, in most cases, beats the performance of the graph databases pretty handily, just because of all of the ability to do things like push down and elimination within a relational engine. So, something you'll see a lot more of going forward. Application development. We're coming out with DB2 REST API support. You'll be able to run Python UDFs within the engine, and there's a whole list of programming language updates that is there. If you can just take a quick look for the ones that interest you. Onto the core engine. Again, you know, with DB2 Warehouse and IIS, there are a lot of Blue and MPP enhancements that are, you know, shared across the common engine. A really interesting one is automatic in-doubt resolution for DPF. So if you have a failure in a DPF cluster, depending on the order of things that come up, sometimes you will end up with in-doubts. And when this happens, it holds back your recovery window. We log all sorts of things to the diag.log to let you know this is happening and also to tell you how to fix it. But, you know, there are cases where this is missed by customers. So one of the things we're doing is, in addition to trying to log a message, we will actually very proactively try to solve the issue ourselves. If we solve it, we'll let you know that in the diag. If we're incapable of solving it, we will also continue to give you messages to tell you the actions needed to take it for yourself. Large number improvements to active workload management. So both it's the ability to, within on-prem, support it for workload equals analytics, but also session priorities and CPU controls. Columnar trickle insert, I will talk about that one more. Big improvements to varchar compression. That one I will also discuss more. Delayed synopsis table population. So this one I don't talk about in more detail, but in blue we have a synopsis table, and as soon as, you know, you put 1,000 rows into your base table, we start populating the synopsis table. And if you only have a small number of rows in your table, like say 1,025 of them, the overhead in the existence of the synopsis table can be significant in the number of extents it uses. But But on the other hand, if your table is super small, you may not be benefiting much from the synopsis because you can't do partition elimination or range elimination. So we're delaying this until a larger number of rows get inserted, just to keep small tables, super small. Again, tons of query performance improvements. So things for early aggregation, early extinct, outer joins, join residual predicate support, and enhancements if you do sort of equivalent to null equal null type things today, where you're saying, is C1 equal to null and is C2 equal to null, and you already had a join on C1 and C2. Enhancements for memory stability, so compact varchar, so minimizing the amount of space used for storing varchars in memory as we're processing through different operations, including sorts and aggregates and joins. Truncate table, so this is a compatibility one. By default, truncate table runs a I'll say a utility style that is not rolled back, cannot be rolled back, and must be the first statement of a transaction. With this, it actually, is much more of a delete style operation and fully supports being anywhere in a transaction and supports rollback. Count distinct for OLAP operations. RID scaler function I'll talk about. And also with alter table, you can now add a lob column. So that was a limitation in the original lob support. Other highlights coming. Automated HADR with Pacemaker coming out as a tech preview for Red Hat, and we're also trying to get SLES support in there for the tech preview, but we'll see how that goes. Pure scale support for Paro 9. Advanced log space management, we've talked about that earlier. There was a tech preview in GA. Faster pure scale online mod pack and fix pack updates. So this part of this is the ability to do them in parallel across multiple members. Ability to block reorg pending operations. I'll talk about that one in a bit more detail. And some new monitor columns. A specific one related to HADR for last takeover time. But there will be other enhancements to monitor coming. Under the core engine, there's optimizer version control, which I'll talk about, faster database activation, which I'll talk about, a few enhancements to SQL and SQL support with skip lock data for queries, nested with support, and alias support and aware clause. Those ones I won't go into detail. They're SQL enhancements. Better cleanup of temporary files used for lobs during a remote load from cursor. So with that one, it's under the covers, and we try a lot more aggressively to be able to clean up the files that are used for temporary buffering as soon as it's possible to do so, rather than waiting to the end. Some faster index splitting at your non-leaf levels under high contention. So if you have very high performance workloads, you'll see an improvement there. And we're adding more packages for support for Oracle Compat. Under security, we are doing our first steps towards single system sign-on with JWT token. And with this, we've worked with Big SQL, the federation layer, to be able to pass the tokens, if they start up, say, in a Watson app, being able to pass them through the DB2 stack and respect them. Authentication caching, which I will get into. We are republicizing some SE Linux white papers in relation to RHEL 7 and 8. And this also came in 11.1.5.4, but the ability to change the SSL server label online. And I know a lot of people are using that in 11.1.5.4 already. And continuing with the focus on cognitive and emerging, we've got the ML Optimizer Tech Preview number 2. We are shipping some in-database analytic functions, so the ability to do things like decision trees, linear regression. If you're interested in which ones, what we're doing now is these exist in DB2 Warehouse today and on IIS today, and we're making them available on-prem. Not all of them will be in the first half, but we are covering off as many as we can. enhancements to spatial analytics. And under federation, we're adding some parallelism for nicknames in DPF environments. The blockchain work should be GAing, and also they've added numerous JDBC connectors and wrappers, and there's probably about 20 of them, so I'm not going to list them all.
Kerri?
Yep.
Quick question from Roland. Could you provide detail on the optimizer version control?
I will be getting to that slide. I'm going to claim shortly, but somewhere in the next
no problem.
30.
We can.
So hopefully somewhere in the next 25 minutes.
You can go over. People want to hear what you have to say.
My goal this time was not to go over, because the last time I was so far over because 3 of us all planned for way too long and shared poorly. So next, any good night show has a top 10 list. I don't have any cards and I don't have any sound effects, so I apologize. And you know, looking at the 2 previous pages, I'm sure the first thing going through your mind is, how did you get down to 10 of them? So first of all, Peter M, I'm smart enough to not even try to pronounce his name, we'll have a DB2Night Show in essentially, I'm going to say 4 weeks from now. And he's going to cover REST API, Graph, ML Optimizer, the in-database analytics, the Python UDFs, which I missed a comma, and also containerization and some of those items. So I'm not going to go into them in detail, but I tried to give a slightly longer discussion on the previous page. I also skipped some of the things that are tech preview items. At that point, I still ran out of room. And I know this is recording, so I probably shouldn't say this out loud, but I probably picked some of the ones that probably go a little better in slides versus things that I couldn't talk about easily just without a slide deck. So on to the top 10. So under security, one of the things is authentication caching. And what happens today is every connection and also certain things within the engine, sometimes running stored procedures and stuff like that, which need to re-authenticate the user it's running at, needs to go out to the LDAP server to authenticate. And if you're running, you know, thousands of connections and, you know, tens of thousands of users a second, going out can be a bottleneck. The actual server itself, depending on what it is a bottleneck, and it can hurt your performance. And what's usually is also true is the data on the LDAP server is generally not changing, you know, instantaneously or that frequently. So what we have done, as soon as I get page down to work, is between, you know, I'll say between DB2, but it's really within the engine. To avoid having to go out to the LDAP server, we now have a cache. So this is controlled by 2 registry variables. The first is authent cache users, and this is the number of entries to be kept in the DB2 authentication cache. So if you had 1,000 unique users, you might want to set this to 1,000, or you may realize that, you know, depending on how often they come, you don't have that much overlap. Or, you know, let's say that most of the connections come in under either, you know, a single web user ID or a online app user ID, or, you know, something like that, or even a utility user ID. So you really only had, say, 10. You could set this to 10. The default is 0, which means it's off by default. In addition to that, there's one called duration, and it's the time in minutes in which any entry is considered valid and available for reuse within DB2. The default to this is 3 minutes. So, you know, if you had a cache user of KERI, and, you know, for 3 minutes I could reuse that, but then I actually have to go back out and pop to, you know, the LDAP server to revalidate that, you know, KERI hadn't been revoked and removed in the last 3 minutes. All right, so this is where you can control you know, how often you have to go back out. In addition, there's actually a new SQL statement to allow SecAtom and DBAtom to clear the cache. So if for some reason you want to force it clear, and it's basically flush authentication cache. There is an option, but it's also the default, so not mentioning it. And again, database monitor and actually DB2 PD are both updated to be able to efficiently monitor the cache and to be able to also do diagnostic information if necessary. The next one is under category of storage improvements, so blue compression improvements. So we have added 2 new page level compression methods for string data for blue. The first works very well with repeating patterns and type compression. It's LZ4 based. If anybody is bored and wants to Google it, it works very well for geospatial data, URLs, comment fields. I mean, even when you have things like names that start repeating. Compression rates for the characters are typically 2 to 4 times, but it does vary highly based on frequency and length of pattern. But we have seen some great compression with this. In addition, we also have a nibble-based compression. So we did the first varchar compression, and there was, many fields where it worked awesome on. And what we learned is some of the fields that it worked most poorly on were things like phone numbers and coordinates and dollar amounts, where you don't necessarily have a lot of repetition, but you have a very small subset of characters. So, you have the numbers 0 to 9, and then you have maybe a dot, a dash, a bracket, or a dollar thing. So the number of unique characters is very small. So what we have is a nibble-based compression. When it works and kicks in, you essentially are guaranteed 2 times compression. And it works for any string that, and this is at a page level because it's page level compression, where within that you only have 16 unique characters. So again, very well for phone numbers, coordinates, sometimes things like part numbers, where within varchars, people are really storing mostly numeric-ish data. Those are the main use cases we've seen for that. And like I said, for those columns, you'll get 2 times compression for every page where you can see that happening. One thing to mention is this is stored compressed both on disk and in the buffer pool. And a key thing for 11.5 customers is when these come out, they will both be off by default, and they're going to require a registry variable to enable. Once you set that, the engine will automatically start using these type of compressions for any new pages created. But because it's using a new compression method that 11.5 GA does not understand, if you were to take a database, in this mod pack, restore it to GA, when you go to access any table that uses the new compression types, as soon as you try to access it, you'll get an error message basically saying that, this table is using new technology it doesn't understand, so you can't read it. So just something to keep in mind. In many ways, I recommend you turn these on because they're great and very useful, but you do have to make sure that, you have time to do a new backup and things like that before you do that, just in case you need to go back to an old level for some reason. Lab results from this. So, these are our own internal results for the blue compression improvement. So the first one is very much customer data. And in 11.1 mod 4, it was at 1.9 gigabytes. In 11.5 GA, it was probably about 10% smaller, 12% smaller. And in, when this comes out in 11.5, it's almost half the size. So, you have 2 times better compression. And these are across the full table, right? So the varchar benefits are even greater, but, you're averaging across, other columns that aren't impacted. So if you had a lot of numerics, they were probably already very well, or dates very well compressed. Another example, and this one's, again, customer-like data. This is actually on an MPP system, so it's a very huge table in the terabytes. Between 11.5 GA and future 11.5, it's under 1/3 of the size. So, you know, in this table, there was actually a higher percentage of varchars in it, and, you know, it was the pattern compression that, you know, was catching a lot, and it, you know, made the table a third of the size. So another one for simplicity, and this is something that has been supported in Row, and I'm going to say at least version 8 or 9, so for a very long time, is the RID scaler function. And we've basically added support for Blue and also supporting it in DPF now. In DPF, you know, you need to use it with partition number, otherwise you can get, you know, if you just said RID, you would get the one that mapped on every single partition if one existed. So use it with partition number if you want to get down to a single row. But, you know, an example of how this is already used today is somebody does getmon locks. They see that there's a row lock on a table. You know, in this case, SAPG01 BBNL test, and you have a lock name, and you want to understand what row is really causing the contention and to understand why. So you can first run a query that takes the lock name, you pass it in, and you basically tell it you want to understand what the TSN is out of it. And so in this case, it's a very small table, so it tells you the TSN of this one row is 1. And then this is where you could use the RID function, where you just do select star from the table that you saw the lock on, and you say where RID equals 1, and you'll get the row returned. So, you know, maybe if you have a really hot product or something and you're getting contention on it, you will be able to use this even in a Blue environment now, and even in a DPF environment to be able to see it. And we're actually building some other function on this because it allows you to sort of see the rows and tables and spread like that too, if you're interested. Okay, now specifically for Roland, I typed this slide up in the last 5 minutes in the background. The simplicity and optimizer version control. So the goal of this is to allow a DBA to quickly revert the optimizer behavior in terms of query rewrites and transformations, and also access plan generation to match a previous version and release. This is a single control that could be quickly used in emergency situations where, you know, maybe you moved up and upgraded a, you know, release or updated a fix pack or mod pack, and you're seeing undesired behaviors to revert to what you were on previously. It can also be used proactively. If we compare this to today, you know, what you would have to do is get a large list of, you know, independent registry variables, some of which are documented and some of which are undocumented, to be able to set. And sometimes this happens through our support org where, you know, if you move up and you see a regression, you know, they look at it and tell you which ones. I will say that this is not intended to be run long-term. You know, in general, there is way more goodness when you move up the optimizer, and, you know, way more benefit. But occasionally, you know, you have the queries that the edge case where the impact is not positive. So for this one, there's a new registry variable. Oh, sorry, Roland, I made you 2 slides quickly in the background. There's a new registry variable called DB2 optimizer version. The default is always equal to whatever the current version is. So you will, you know, whatever we put the default in the new level, you will automatically get that. It can be sent to any 4-part release name since 10.5. And you would set it to, so for example, if you were on, you know, 11.5.1.1 and you wanted to match GA, you could set it to 11.5.0.0. I will note that this does not prevent new plan changes due to statistics or any other non-optimizer code changes. So it doesn't, you know, if you're thinking plan lockdown, it doesn't totally lock them down from any possible changes. It just guarantees that the optimizer code is running the same. And this registry variable is applied first, and then if you have other registry variables that override anything in this one, it will override them. So, you know, other things set take priority, and this is the starting point. I'm going to pause just in case Roland has, or anybody else has questions on this one.
Another question here from Ram saying, if we set this DB2 optimizer version, then the behavior changes the entire database. Is that correct?
Yeah, yes, and it's actually really the entire, as with most regvars, the entire instance. So if you have multiple databases, right?
Right.
And this is where it can be overridden by both the SQL compiler registries, and I think it can also be overridden by any of the optimizer hints. If you know, and today you can put things on specific statements if you actually only want to affect single statements and not set this.
Right.
Okay, I'm going to go on to the next slide, and Martin can interrupt if there's more questions. The next one under simplicity is the ability to block operations that result in reorg pending. So, you know, very similar to how we have a block non-logged for HADR. The goal of this is to prevent a user accidentally running an alter table statement that puts a table into reorg pending and affects subsequent access to the table. And you get full access back by running reorg, but you often don't want somebody to accidentally do it at an inappropriate time. So some of the operations that place the table into reorg pending are things like drop column, alter column set not null, alter column drop null. The changing data types, except for two situations. One is if you're increasing the length, or two, if you're decreasing the length of something that is not in an index, and you're not having to truncate trailing blanks. And for this one, new registry variable, DB2 block reorg pending. The default is off, and you can set it to on when you want to prevent these. You'll get an SQL code 270 with reason code 129 for anybody who tries to run one of these. The next one I'll talk about is faster buffer pool startup. This was a tech preview in 11.5 GA. We're moving it to on by default, and depending on your platform and the size of your buffer pools, you know, on Linux we've seen over 100 times faster, and on AIX over 40 times faster for buffer pool startup and database activation time. Next one is performance of columnar trickle is performance related. It's specific to blue and columnar tables, and it's trickle feed insert. So the goal of this was twofold. One is to feed up trickle or very small inserts into blue. So blue is already very good if you're inserting, thousands, tens of thousands of rows at a time. So the bulk insert in the picture on the right-hand side. Where the impact is if you're inserting single rows, because every row would need to touch a different page for every single column that's being inserted, so the overhead is a lot more. It also will reduce memory footprint for those inserts. And another benefit of the way we've done it is it will actually decrease the size of small tables. So today with Blue, and I mentioned this with the synopsis, is if you were to create a table with 1,000 columns and to put one row in, you end up using one extent for every column that exists. So you end up using 1,000 extents even though you put one row in. There's a new registry variable called DB2 call insert groups. Again, it's default to off, and much like the characteristics for compression, because it's new format on disk, once you set it to on, any tables that start using this will not be readable by the previous mod packs. So the first thing is DB2 has always been able to support within a column or configuration putting multiple columns on a page. And by default, we don't do that because for best compression, we want like types to be together. If you're going to be scanning later on and you only need one column, we want things to be packed as much as possible. But we already do this for certain internal columns, and we already do this for it's actually how the nullability of a column is stored. So this is really built into our infrastructure. But one of the key things here is as you put these in, they're actually initially going to go in you start with a row, and you're going to put, I'm not going to say the whole row at this point, but a subset of the row into a single page. And it's actually going to go in uncompressed, and this allows these inserts to go in much quicker. One of the things is we will actually take your row, and it won't necessarily go in as a single set of columns onto a single page. It may go into multiple, and we have some math to try to make sure that we're getting a decent number of rows or part rows onto each page. And we already split out, so your fixed length will go into one, your variable length will go into another. We kind of split numerics out. So as your insert is happening, you're going to be inserting rows. Those rows are going to get broken up into not a per column entry, but some number that is much less than the number of columns. And it's going to be stored that way and stored uncompressed initially. And then automatically in the background, when those, what I'll call them caches and are getting filled, it will actually go into the bulk insert code path and pack those up together and split them out into the per column approach that exists in blue. So this is essentially it's still columnar format, right? It may not be stored as a single row. It may be stored as, one part if it's a very narrow table. It may still be stored as say 50 parts if it's a wide table, but it won't be stored per column, and it will be split out as it goes. And this vastly improves both the performance for the inserts, because the compression is also getting delayed, and the amount that is kept in this format is actually very small in relation to the whole table. So the overhead of doing this for, on queries is incredibly small, but the benefit of, your insert time for small transactions is enormous. And hopefully the next times we start presenting this, I can actually get some of the live performance data to show what some of the impact is.
Kerri?
Yep.
I have another question for you here from Ram. Is the reorg pending setting dynamic, or does the database need to be recycled?
All the ones that I've talked about are dynamic, so not just that one, but also the ones for trickle feed and compression.
Great, thank you.
I'm going to go through the next slides really quickly because I know Dave has been here many times and I've presented this many times but adaptive workload management, it has been in DB2 warehouse and IIS for, I'm going to say years now, at least 2, if not 3 or more. And what's happening is, in the target for first half is to have it that you can turn it on if you have workload equals analytics databases, so i.e. your primary columnar. Support for having it for pure row databases will be coming later. And the whole idea of the adaptive workload management is you're breaking things into classes of things that are similar time estimates, and a key part of it is the first time you do it, it's based on estimates for time and memory, and also on CPU, but also as you're running, you learn. So, if maybe the plan estimate was way off and one of your low things is really high or vice versa, they can feedback loop and shuffle so they end up in the right category. And then you can send in, a large number of things that, take a little bit of effort or a few things that take a large amount. As I mentioned on the previous slide, stage 1, which is the target for first half, is to have it available for on-prem customers using workload equals analytics. Stage 2 will follow at some point. Another one that I can go through super quickly is advanced log space management. Again, there's a full deck probably from late last year that Michael Roken did. But the whole goal of this is to simplify log space management. And today what happens is if you have a transaction that does either just a little bit of logging and then goes off and does something else before it commits, or you have a user who does a little bit of logging and then he goes for lunch for getting to commit, he's holding back the whole set of active logs. And what you get with log space management is we can take those few transactions that have just a little bit of logging and have yet to commit, pull them out into their own extraction log files, and then allow the rest of the active logs to move up. And this can benefit you both by preventing log full conditions. It can actually help undo time if you ever do try to roll back that transaction because it's now together in a single file. It can also help in crash recovery times because you could potentially have less active log to read. And again, there's a night show with Mike Roken who goes into this and a few other 11.1 items in detail. Spatial analytics. So this is something that was a tech preview in 11.5 GA. And we already had spatial extenders. And this is a much more built-in model. And on the next slide, I'll just do some quick, I guess 2 slides for now, I'll do some quick comparisons. But, it's lob-based, works in both columnar and row-based. It allows all your standard functions that you're probably used to if you've used either other people's spatials or DB2's extender support. And it can be enabled basically with the install objects procedure. And just to compare them, the processing method is they're both processed in database. The new analytics supports column store and row store. Currently, the spatial extender allows an index, which is a spatial grid. We are looking at potentially adding filtering types to spatial analytics. They both support joins. They both support similar functions. Some of the defaults and some of what is supported are broader in the spatial analytics because it's the new drop that also supports columnar, and the maximum sizes are pretty much the same. So anybody with columnar will be using the analytics one. If you are in row, you can actually at this point choose between them. So that was my top 10 list. One of the other things I wanted to point out was, what is going to be some upcoming changes to the support matrix for the 11.5 stream. And the key here is there are a lot of new additions, but there are also a couple things being discontinued because they are pretty close to being out of service if they are not already out of service at the operating system level. So what's being added is Red Hat, and people keep asking about Red Hat 8, so it's being added. If you're on PBCLE, it's going to be with P9 native. SLES 15 special 1. The first drop will not support automated HA, but as long as you're not running TSA or PureScale, you can use it. Windows 2019 support, and if you're using the Mac DS driver, client, Catalina is being added. Right. The key ones to note is on AIX, the 7.1 and Power 7 support is being dropped. On Linux 390, we're getting rid of the 32-bit Ubuntu, and also the 10.10 on Yosemite for the client. Jumping to the PureScale list, it's very similar in the sense that the AIX 7.1 and Power 7 is being dropped. We're adding Red Hat 8.1, Red Hat 7.6, and adding new TL levels and also P9 native off that TL level for PureScale. So now the musical performance. So happy belated April Fool's Day. Anyone who knows me, it's really better off that I don't sing. And given I'm pretty well already 4 minutes over, I won't make Alexa sing for you.
I had my trombone ready too.
Oh, actually, I forgot. There is someone musical on this that I could have had Martin do a musical interlude. You want to know more detail? And I stated up front, things can and do change. If you want to keep up to date, we have the public roadmap, and we also have the AHA Ideas portal where you can open ideas of what you'd like to see come. And Peter M. is doing another DB2Night Show on May 1st, and he is going to cover off a lot of the ones that I didn't in terms of Graph, REST API, and some of the ML technology coming.
Also, Michael Roken did his advanced log space management in January, so the replay is available on the DB2Night Show replay blog.
Right. Credits, everyone on the DB2 team and the DB2 family that's contributing, code back to the core common SQL engine. And a special thanks to everyone who I borrowed slides from to make this presentation, and of course to Martin for inviting me on the night show and running the night show.
Well, thank you, Gary. Great job. Everybody was, with the questions you had, very clear that people were very interested in what you had to say. And I've taken back over control now, and I'm going to just get us to the final slide. But we have our final question. Did you learn anything today? I think we know what the answer is going to be to this. That everybody that tuned in did learn something, and we'll just share that with you right now. See that on the screen. 100% of our audience learned something, as we would expect out of the information you provided. As always, we are over time. I'll wish everybody, I'm not sure that there's such a thing as a weekend anymore. We all work from home all the time, and one day runs into the next. But be safe, and we will see you in 2 weeks for All About iDoug, and then for Peter's show in 4 weeks from now. Thanks so much.
Yep. Thank you, everyone, and stay safe.
Stay safe. Thanks so much. Bye-bye.